Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to be with you today, and I want to thank the Manning Center for inviting me. Thank you, Preston. It's always a privilege and an honor to be with you. This is an amazing opportunity for myself to meet like-minded friends like you from across the country, and also to recharge our batteries with tons of good ideas from the best minds in the conservative movement. J'aimerais en profiter pour remercier M. Manning de m'avoir invité aujourd'hui et aussi mes collègues du panel de très bonnes idées pour aider les entrepreneurs à développer leur plan d'affaires, leur business. Mais aujourd'hui, ce que j'aimerais discuter, c'est la différence fondamentale entre notre parti, nous les conservateurs, et les libéraux en ce qui concerne l'économie et aussi la Constitution. I hope you have been taking advantage of the conference because this year is going to be a crucial year for our country. It will be a time for choosing stability or uncertainty. A consolidation of the gains we have achieved over the past several years, which have made Canada one of the soundest economies in the world, or gambling with superficially appealing but reckless policies. This is the choice that Canadians will have to make before the end of this year, and we have to make sure that it will be clear in everyone's mind what kind of policies are best for Canadians. But before we get into this debate, I want to rewind the tape a little bit. I want to talk about the coolest decade of the 20th century, the 1970s. You remember the 1970s? I think I can spot some people, Preston, some people in this room who are old enough like me to remember it. Yes, the 1970s, the decade of disco, with Donna Summers, the Bee Gees, and Saturday Night Fever, the decade of men in jumpsuit with long hair. Can you imagine me like that? On the economic front, it was not cool. It was a decade of stagflation, economic stagnation with inflation, the decade of big deficits and huge debt, the decade of the National Energy Program, the decade when the federal government was growing like wildfire, the decade when we had all these brilliant federal politicians and bureaucrats who were not busy enough running the federal government, but they also wanted to run the provinces. The decade of federal intervention in healthcare and education, the decade of centralization and nationalization, the decade when, partly in reaction to that federal activism, separatism in Quebec grew and grew, when the PQ became the official opposition in 1970s, and also formed the government in 1976, and held its first referendum in 1980. I think I can feel a wave of nostalgia in the room for that blessed period. The 1970s, yes, the decade of Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Under Pierre Trudeau, total government spending went from $13 billion to $109 billion, from 17% of GDP to 24%. Our national debt went from 25% of GDP in 1968 to 43% in 1984. That's what they called progress back then. As I told you, this year is a time for choosing. Canadians will have to make an important decision. They will have to decide if they want to live in the 21st century or if they want to go back to that Trudeau years. Does anyone here want to relive those days? I don't think so. I don't want. But that's where the leader of the Liberal Party, Justin Trudeau, wants to take us. Okay. Some people might think, Maxime, it is unfair to compare Justin Trudeau with his father and to burden him with the record of his father. After all, is he not his own person? Yes, well, yeah, but I'm not the one who created the Trudeau mystique. I'm not the one who made the connection in the first place. And if he's so different from Pierre, then why did Liberals elect him to lead their party? Tell me. I will help you a little bit on that. Is it because of his vast political experience? No. Is it because of his deep understanding of how the economy works? No. Is it because of his amazing leadership qualities? Is it because of his original insight in how to keep our country united? No, and you are right. You are right. They elected him because he is a Trudeau. They elected him because they missed the Trudeau years of the 70s and they cherish that legacy. They elected him because they want to go back to that golden age of liberalism and they want to bring back his father's policies. So, what kind of choice are we talking about? It's very clear. Over the past 9 years, there has been a clear political trend in Quebec. Support for separatism has been steadily going down. Oh yes, there are various explanations for that. But one thing is certain. Under our government, Quebecers have had constitutional peace. Our government respects the Constitution, we respect the division of power, and we respect the autonomy of provinces. And that is why Quebecers are happy and proud to be Canadian. It is why there is no appetite in Quebec for separation. Now, what can we expect if Justin Trudeau becomes Prime Minister? But we got a taste of that. We got a taste of that at the last Liberal Convention last year, when delegates discussed a whole set of national strategies on issues ranging from transportation to energy, mental health, children, water, pharmacare, youth jobs, and science. For me, this is the model of a federal government intervening in our day-to-day life and meddling in provincial jurisdiction, a model that Justin Trudeau is once again proposing. The same old policies his father pursued 40 years ago. In his speeches and interviews, Trudeau keeps saying that education is important. We know that education is important. But education is a provincial jurisdiction. What he wants is to interfere in provincial matters. For me, with that vision of Canada, we will not have constitutional peace in Quebec. A Justin Trudeau government will be destabilizing for our national unity, just like a Pierre Trudeau government was. Canadians will have a clear choice between us, the Conservative, respecting the Constitution, and provincial jurisdiction, or the Liberals, creating a bunch of so-called national programs with money that we don't have. If we continue to do what we're doing, we won't have a constitutional crisis in Canada. But if we get a Trudeau government in power that starts to centralize the government, the country, without respecting the Constitution, we can safely predict that separatism in Quebec will rise again. One of our government's most spectacular achievements is the reduction of the tax burden on Canadian taxpayers. The ratio of government revenue to GDP is at its lowest level in more than 50 years. I repeat, at its lowest level in more than 50 years, before you know who came to power in 1968. That means that the average Canadian family pays $3,400 less in taxes today than under the previous Liberal government. Justin Trudeau promised to reverse this trend. He wants to take back the tax cuts that we gave you. We want to shrink the government to give you back your freedom. But the Liberals, they want to shrink your paycheck and take away your freedom. The Liberals are very clear. Oh yes, they are very clear as to what is their priority. Not cutting taxes, but spending. Spending more to stimulate the economy. Justin Trudeau and his finance critic, Scott Bryson, have repeatedly refused to roll out running a deficit again for many more years if they are elected. Doesn't it sound like déjà vu? Justin Trudeau keeps uttering one economic absurdity after another. Get this. When he reacted to our governance budget last year, he said, there is no need to worry about the deficit. We should aim rather at stimulating the economy and, as he put it, the budget will balance itself. For Mr. Trudeau, the more a government spends, the more it stimulates the economy, the more its revenues will grow, and the less we need to worry about the deficit. So, let's spend our way to prosperity. No, seriously, Canadians know that if we all spend more than we have, we won't get richer. It's called living beyond our means. One has to wonder then why the deficit and debt exploded in the 1970s when his father implemented this kind of irresponsible economic policy. Perhaps he was not spending enough. At the last Liberal convention, delegates heard Larry Summers, an American economist, explain why we need unconventional support policies. This is economic jargon for spending without restraint. According to him, accumulating more debt is okay when it serves to stimulate the economy. We all know that more spending and more borrowing will not act as an economic stimulus, but rather as an economic sedative, because less money will be available for the private sector, and it is only private sector entrepreneurs who create wealth. In a video released last year, Justin explained that households and provincial governments are heavily indebted, while the federal government has considerably lowered its debt level since the 1990s. So, according to Mr. Trudeau, Ottawa is the only entity that has room to rack up more debt. Therefore, it should step up and spend more to stimulate the economy. This is like a couple who have racked up a large amount of consumer debt. They check their 3 credit card bills, and the husband says to his wife, "Hey, we've reached our limit on these 2 cards, but we still have some credit left on this 3rd one. We can get richer if we max out this one too. So let's go shopping." Can you imagine a more absurd economic policy? Mr. Trudeau seems to forget that it is the same taxpayer who will have to pay back the debts of both levels of government, provincial and federal, as well as his own. We know that, and it's why our government has taken control of the debt. The debt to GDP ratio is at 33%. This is the best performance of all G7 countries. And our plan is to bring that to 25%. The debt is not something abstract. Servicing the debt costs taxpayers about $30 billion a year. This is as much as the GST brings into government coffers. The more we cut down the size of the debt, the fewer resources we will need to pay the interest, and the more we will be able to afford to cut your taxes. Justin Trudeau and his American advisor still believe in the old Keynesian theory that says governments can create wealth by spending more money. But when the government injects money into the economy, where does it come from? It is not falling from the sky. In reality, every time the government takes an additional dollar in taxes out of someone's pocket, that's a dollar that person will not be able to spend or to invest. When government spending goes up, private spending goes down. There is no wealth creation. Government borrowing has the same effect. The private lenders who lend money to the government will have less money to lend to private businesses. When government borrowing and spending go up, private borrowing and spending go down. There is no wealth creation. It is like taking a bucket of water from the deep end of a swimming pool and emptying it in the shallow end. Nothing happens. It's this kind of policies that ruined our economy in the 1970s. Prosperity comes not from government spending, but from entrepreneurs investing. To stimulate the economy, we need to give the entrepreneurs the means to create wealth. We need to put in place the best possible conditions to allow the private sector to become more productive by curtailing public spending, cutting taxes, reducing the burden of regulation, and signing free trade agreements. Growth and progress depend on economic freedom through less government intervention. More government spending is not the answer to our social and economic challenges. The task is not to reinvent the government, Mr. Trudeau. The task is to limit government. The Liberals want a bigger government because they elevate the government and downgrade the citizen. We Conservatives want a smaller government because ultimately we believe and we support personal responsibility and individual freedom. We have faith in people. We have faith that you have the ability, the dignity, and the right to make your own decision and determine your own destiny. This is a time for choosing. Uncertainty with more spending, more deficit, more debt, and less economic growth, and a bigger government with constitutional fights under Justin Trudeau and the Liberals, or stability, a steady economic end, a balanced budget, lower taxes, and constitutional peace under Stephen Harper and the Conservatives. And in my mind, the choice is very clear. Thank you. Merci. Thank you.